And so when I sold my company, I decided I was going to try and see if I could figure this out and figure out who those folks were. And the research, the journey we've been on since then, starts with this one quite beautiful little thought, that every organization on earth, including yours, including governments, including somebody who sells hot dogs out of a stand on a street with some busy bars and nightclubs, we're all here trying to do the same thing. We're all just trying to get some people to do something. That's it. My friends at Hilton, my friends at Delta Airlines, all the DMCs in this room, we're only just trying to get some people to do something. The rest of it's just layers of bureaucracy and structure that we put in place because we're humans and we like all that stuff. But we all wake up in the morning, go to work, and try and figure out how to get some people to do something we'd like them to do, which begs the question, how do people decide to do something? So here's another story for you. It's called Three Friends in an Alley at Midnight because it starts about three friends who've been out having a few drinks, and they haven't been able to see each other for a long time because there's been a global pandemic, and suddenly they're able to get together like this and have a few drinks. So it's getting close to midnight, and they've had a few drinks too many. And they decide it's time to call it. It's not going to be a late night, they're going to go home. So they're walking down the street, they're being noisy and loud. You know how when you walk out of a bar when you've had a few drinks with your friends and suddenly your voices get twice as loud as they were when you were inside? That's going on. They're telling jokes that only they think are funny. They're having a really great time. They turn a corner and then suddenly there's a dark alley. And they have to decide what they're going to do. Now, friend number one, we only know one thing for certain. The one thing we know about friend number one is their primary value in life is adventure. Well, guess what friend number one wants to do? Wants to go down that dark alley. What an amazing way to end this evening. We're a little bit drunk. I love you guys. Let's go down the alley. It'll be so much fun. Who knows what's going to happen? And friend number two, the only thing we know for certain is that friend number two's primary value in life is safety. And friend number two says, why would we go down that dark alley? Don't be ridiculous. It's midnight. It's dark. We're a little bit drunk. I love you guys. Something might happen. Let's go back to the bar, turn on the lights, and call the police. And friend number three, the only thing we know for certain is friend number three's primary value is friendship. I don't care if we go down the alley. I don't care if we go back to the bar. Just stick together because we're a little bit drunk, and I love you guys. That's the end of that story. The point of that story is that none of those people had to check in with themselves before making a decision to see what their demographics were. None of them had to say to themselves, well, gee, I'm an 18 to 24-year-old male with 2.3 children. I earn $50,000 a year, and I have an MBA, so I should behave this way. All they had to do was check and see, what do I care about? What are my values? And that drove the way they made a decision, whether they knew they were doing it or not, consciously or subconsciously. In fact, all of us, all day long, spend our lives making decisions based on our values. Now, behavioral scientists have known this for a very, very long time. For decades now, they've been studying this. And I'm going to try and summarize for you in 3 quick slides a lot of behavioral science research. It starts with neurologists. Neurologists study our brains, and I'm sure you've all heard this phrase before, that our prefrontal cortex is the CEO of our brain. Our CEO's job is to take all the incoming data, everything we see all day long, all the sights and sounds and smells that come along, and figure out what we're going to do about this situation. Are we going to go down that dark alley or not? Well, it turns out our prefrontal cortex, our CEO, only uses one set of filters to figure this out, and it's what we care about, what our values are. Which kind of makes sense, doesn't it, right? You stand back and say, well, gee, if family is the most important thing in my life and something comes along that might be good for my family, I'm going to want that. I'm going to run towards that. That's going to make me happy if I can get more of that. Something comes along that might be bad for my family, however, I'm going to run away from that. I'm going to avoid that. I don't even want to talk about that because it might harm something that I care about deeply that motivates my life. So that's the neurologists. If you talk to the psychologists, they'll talk about this in all kinds of different ways. One way, though, is to talk about confirmation bias. We've all heard this term. It's a fancy psychological term for a thing we need to avoid when we're building surveys and doing studies. Confirmation bias is the natural human tendency to say yes and agree with the stuff we already think is important, the stuff we already agree with. So if you're not careful when you're putting a survey together and writing those questions out, you're going to get flawed responses because you're giving people an opportunity to not answer really the way they want to answer. They're trying to answer in a way that gives them the confirmation bias that they're looking for. But what if we could flip that around? What if we knew what they cared about in advance so that we wanted as much confirmation bias as possible, because then it would help us get people to do the things we would like them to do. I'm getting ahead of myself, but the point here is that psychologists agree what we value determines every decision we make. All our values determine our behaviors, our decisions, and our emotions. And then sociologists, last one, and then we'll leave the science behind because science can be a little bit boring sometimes. Sociology, that's what we do. We have a sociological data set that we've built that we do our work with and that we've done some work that I'm going to share with you. Sociologists study large groups of people. Why did this group of people go and do this thing and this other group of people go and do this other thing instead? It's always because of what they cared about and what their values are. This group of people valued this stuff, so they did that thing. This other group of people, though, they valued this stuff more, so they did this other thing instead. Quite simple. So here we are, all these different fields of behavioral science. They all agree on this one common principle. What we value determines what we do. If you only remember one thing from my presentation and our time together today, make it that line. What we value determines everything we do. We can't help it. We are biologically, neurologically, psychologically, sociologically hardwired to chase our values. It's what being human is.